yourself and your work.
hmm So
Yeah.
I'm Annie McDonnell. I'm so happy to be here with you. And I'm an acupuncturist and a sound healing practitioner. And I'm about to finish up a training in grief education, which involves sort of like grief counseling. So I do a mix of things, and I'm excited to talk about grief because hardly anyone does, and it's such a rich topic.
Yeah, it's I find it's, along with money, taxes, it's something that, people tend to avoid when you bring it up. It's, yeah. It's one of
Like
those topics. Yeah,
it affects everyone, but
it does.
it's like touching a live wire.
Exactly. And I liked how you mentioned last time, it's also one of those things that maybe unless you have experienced it yourself in an intimate way, it can, you know, it might be difficult to, yeah,
Right.
to
People
talk
feel
with someone
very
about it.
right. People feel very uncomfortable, and they're afraid of saying the wrong thing, or they don't know what to say, or if they haven't been through it yet, they don't know the immensity of the
Yeah.
experience. They say something that maybe isn't maybe isn't the most
Right.
helpful thing.
Yeah.
So it's nice to start talking about it so people can learn, even if they're not experiencing grief directly themselves, they'll know how to show up for their friends and family who are going through a difficult experience. And the other thing too that I found in talking to people is so many people don't even realize that they are going through their own grieving process
Right.
because we have this idea that it's just someone dying,
Yeah.
but it could be, your a loss of identity from losing a job
Yeah.
or losing a home or so many different things. And during the pandemic, of course, we all lost
Yes.
some way or another. So you can be grieving just the loss of the way things used to be, and that's its own type of grief.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And like you were saying, there's quite a lot of information out there about, when the loss of deceased loved ones, but not so much about grieving people that are currently still alive. And for a lot of black sheep and scapegoats, I know that there's a lot of grief around the relationship that they never are able to have or could have with their parents or siblings. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
That's a particularly painful topic because not only do you have the grief, but then you might have a layer of shame or guilt on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the support networks, there's no, when someone dies, at least there might be a funeral or a memorial.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a slight acknowledgement and some like a beginning amount of honoring the experience or giving people some closure. But when you're grieving someone who's estranged, um, there's so much less resolution, and
Yeah.
it takes up so much internal energy because part of you is trying to make sense of the situation, and because the person is still alive, there is the potential down the road for maybe some sort of reconciliation or some sort of forgiveness. Um, so it can weigh almost heavier in a way. And one of the fundamental parts of grief, people may just think sadness, but at the heart of it, it's a really deep yearning.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
When someone you love dies and you've had a good relationship, you're yearning to have them in your life again.
Right.
Every day I yearn to pick up the phone and call my mom or ask my dad for advice. Um, and you know that you can never have satisfaction to that. So it's just this. That's why grief is so persistent because it is this at the root of it. It's just this yearning that will pop up,
Mm-hmm.
especially like milestone occasions.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're a black sheep who's maybe not talking to a family member, and you have a happy experience like a wedding, it's still tinged with
Yeah.
us
Mm-hmm.
because in a perfect world, everyone would be sitting around the table celebrating with you. So there's definitely a lot of, uh, I think there's unrecognized grief support that people need for more everyday situations. And it's quite common to have estranged family members or,
Mm-hmm.
friends that are, or friendships that are maybe, um, a little bit on the rocks. Um, and you can need support in coming to a place where you feel strong enough and supported enough that whether or not there's resolution, you can be at peace with it.
Mm-hmm. And I also liked how you talked about that, the grieving process isn't linear, and that
Mm-hmm.
I remember last time we talked about, every day there can be little occurrences that can, trigger something. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a popular misconception because
Mm-hmm.
there's a popular book in the 60s that laid out the stages of grief.
Yeah.
And so people may know like denial, anger, um, bargaining, I'm forgetting one, and then it theoretically ends with acceptance. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but what people don't realize is that book was actually written not about people who have lost someone, but people who had a terminal diagnosis and were dying themselves. So
Mm. I
itself
did
is a
not know
grief.
that.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
sort of extrapolated.
Yeah.
Um, there is some common ground. People who are grieving may dip in and out of those stages, but it's definitely not a linear process.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more individual and complicated than, oh, now you're at step A. Don't worry, you'll be at
Yeah.
step B soon. And then you'll end up with acceptance. Because even if you get to the point of, I mean, I think a lot of people do actually start at the point of acceptance because you recognize that it's a reality that that person isn't here
Right.
anymore. You can't pick up the phone and talk to them. There's nothing really you can do, so you accept it. But that's not like a happy acceptance or
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
you know a, a place of ease. So it's kind of a misnomer to think like, oh yeah, you'll get to the place of acceptance. That's in a way almost the beginning
Right.
of integrating the experience and giving yourself the grace to know that however together you think you might have it, there's going to be one day where you're in the grocery store and a song hits you that reminds you of someone or some
Mm-hmm.
time. Um, because grief is so tied into love and longing, it doesn't
Yes.
just get away.
Yes. And speaking of which, that reminds me of that conversation that we had. When you say that, with grief, there's this tie, this connection. Um, if you could share about, how you said it affects us energetically. I loved what you said about the severed energetic connection. When you told me about that, everything made so much sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. It's well, I'll start on a physical level before it even
Yeah.
gets because I get into the energetic level.
Yeah.
Um, but what they're doing more scientific research on is how grief literally affects the brain physically. They're starting to do like functional magnetic resonance.
Mm-hmm.
What areas of the brain light up? They're the closer you're tied to someone, the more your neural pathways are really completely woven together with that person, or
Mm-hmm.
that animal, or even that job that you go to every day.
Yeah.
Um, so the brain likes to be able to predict how things are going to happen, and it's constantly searching for patterns to make sense of the world in a faster way. So if you think about a pet, um, there you wake up and they may be next to you in bed or on the floor. First thing you do is feed them, take them for a walk. Like your whole day is kind of tied into a rhythm with um, your partner or your pet or
Mm-hmm.
calling your best friend or whoever it may be. And so your brain has pathways that just kind of fire automatically. And when you lose half of that equation, your brain has to work really, really hard to make sense of it. And on an emotional level, um, you may understand something rationally, but it still brings up a feeling of abandonment. You know,
Mm-hmm.
part of your brain knows, okay, that person is no longer here, but part of your brain, think of like almost like an inner child,
Yeah.
is running scenarios like, did I say something wrong that they're not
Oh, yeah.
telling me?
Mm-hmm.
I like, I mean, when you think of like all the neurochemicals too, that like when you hug someone, you each release oxytocin and you feel good. So we're constantly, we're social beings. So we're constantly weaving these connections to people and places and things that really matter to us. And that's, we kind of have an inner map of the world based around the things that matter to us. So you take one of those pieces out, and it does feel like everything falls apart and
Mm-hmm.
circuits anymore. So that's like one of the things about grief that people don't um, acknowledge, because you're expected to just like, go back to work in 5 days and
Right.
that amount off. Like your brain is actually physically working hard trying to rewire connections to make sense of how different everything is. And then taking that to an energetic level, if you think of the cords of energy that weave us together. I know probably most every parent at one level, even if they're not the parent that you'd hope they'd be or you'd want them to be, I think you do feel that tug between your heart and the heart of who brought you into the world, or
Yes. Yeah.
you brought into the world, or between, I mean, talk about black sheep. It's, siblings can get very easily estranged because that can be a very tricky relationship. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you think about the deep energetic ties between siblings, that you have the same origin, and who almost like who knows you better from the very beginning of your life to hopefully throughout most of your life, and who have you competed against the most, who have you measured yourself against the most. So with all these interactions, and the more love you feel, or the more love that you hope to get out of a relationship, more, you know, whether the person is able to reciprocate or not, you still have the image and you still have the love that you want to give to someone. Um,
Yes.
that is an energy that can get very wound up with another person or a place. So it really is a big blow when you lose that from any angle.
Oh, and what I hear that you're saying is that, both on the physical